I'm Kathleen Henderson from Roots and Boots, and I'm going to show you how I support my pepper plants. So pepper plants can get around 3 feet tall, maybe even taller depending on the variety, and it can be very helpful to give them some support. Otherwise, they start to flop over, they can be prone to breakage, they can sustain damage from winds, and they can be difficult to harvest the peppers from. So what I like to do is use a stake at either end of my peppers and use twine to do what some people call the Florida weave. You can call it whatever you want. You basically wrap your twine at the end of the stake and then you weave it in front of one plant, behind the next plant, etc., alternating down the row, and then you wrap it tightly around the end stake and then bring it back, weaving it back to the original stake and tying it tightly. Let me show you the supplies and tools that you need to support your peppers. You really only need 4 things. You need stakes, and I like to use wooden stakes. You could also use T-posts or rebar. You need something that the twine can grab onto. So a smooth plastic stake is not recommended, and you need it to be sturdy, obviously, and then you need to consider the height of the stake. So ideally, I would say a 4-foot stake would be the safest option. You're going to pound it down about 1 foot into the ground. So whatever the height of the stake is, you can subtract at least 1 foot from that to tell you how far above the ground your stake is going to come. And you want the stake to be roughly the height of your peppers. Now this variety of pepper, this is Jimmy Nardello, and it doesn't get super tall, so I'm using a little bit shorter stake. I think these are maybe 3-foot stakes, and you can see they're sticking about 2 feet above the ground. Secondly, you need some kind of twine. I'll tell you what I'm using, I'll tell you what not to use, and I'll tell you what I wish I was using. So this is a synthetic twine. It is kind of plasticky. The twine itself is okay, although I do feel like it's a little bit slippery when I'm tying my knots. I feel like the knots can have a tendency to slide. The tension of your twine is really the key to the success of this weaving to support your pepper plants, because you need those lines to stay taut, to stay tight. That's what gives the support. So if there is slippage of the knot on the line, then you can lose that tension and lose the support. This twine works okay. What you don't want to use is a cotton or all natural or jute twine, because that is going to get wet and then dry and it's going to expand, and again you're going to lose the tension on your line. What I would like to try is a nylon twine that looks kind of like string or rope, but it's not natural, it's not cotton, it's synthetic nylon, because that's gonna hold up better to the elements. So I have this huge roll of this twine that I've been using for the past few years, and like I said, I'm making do with it, but if you're starting this from scratch, I would recommend using a nylon twine, and I will do my best to put a suggestion for you in the description of this video if you're looking for something to purchase to get started. The other tools you'll need are a rubber mallet and just something to cut with, scissors, whatever. This side I have already done. So you start by wrapping at least 3 times tightly around your stake, tie a double knot, and then you're going to weave in and out of the plants, in front, behind, all the way down. Then you're gonna come to your opposite stake and you're gonna wrap at least 3 times tightly around the stake and then come right back up. So if you came around the front of this plant, then you're gonna come around the back, so that you're doing that weave all the way back, and that each plant has 1 line running in front and 1 line running behind, all the way back to the original stake. And then again, wrap it at least 3 times. And when you do your first string, when you start your string here at this stake, if you leave a tail, then you can secure both tails together when you get back to this original stake. It's good to start this process when your pepper plants are about 1 foot high. If you wait much longer than that, you're gonna get a lot of flopping and the peppers are gonna grow funny and you're gonna have trouble trying to make them stand up straight again. So try to start this when your peppers are around 1 foot tall. You're gonna do your first line about 6 to 8 inches from the ground. And then as the peppers grow over the next few weeks, as they get a little taller, when they're tall enough to add a second line up here, then you'll add a top line, same way, and that will be a nice sturdy way to keep your pepper plants supported and remaining upright. One thing to consider, and I did not do this here, I'll explain why. Ideally, you probably want to put a stake every 4 pepper plants. So stake, 1, 2, 3, 4 peppers, another stake, and so on. Because of the size of my raised beds here that I'm working with, I have 5 pepper plants in my row, so I'm just making it work. But depending on your growing situation, you might want to even keep that in mind when you're planning where to plant your peppers and how to arrange them in your beds. Ideally, you want to shoot for 4 peppers between a set of stakes. And then you can keep that going. You can do a stake, 4 peppers, a stake, another 4 peppers, another stake. You just want to aim to have that sturdy stake about every 4 pepper plants to keep that tension in your line. So I've already started my second line here. I finished this one on this row, and now I wrap 3 times tightly around this stake, and I left a tail for later to tie that on, and I double knotted it very securely, and now I'm going to weave. See, this plant is already flopping over, and it would turn into a mess if I didn't give it some support like this. So it's still gonna flop for a minute until I get the second line there, but I'm coming on this side of this plant, other side of this plant. This one is flopping also, so I do my best to stand it up. Keep my twine going every other plant. And you want the twine to be against the stem without damaging the branches. Now I've lost my tension, so I'm gonna pull it tight again. So now I am at the second stake, and I'm going to wrap at least 3 times tightly around this stake, holding it tight with one hand and then wrapping with the other. Come around the back side one more time, and now since I'm on this side for that first line, I'm gonna switch and go on the front side of this plant. And the entire time that I'm weaving, I'm making sure to keep tight tension on my line. And now I am back at the original stake, and I'm gonna wrap it at least 3 times. More is better than less. Better to wrap it more times, keeping that tension tight the entire time. And now I'm ready to cut my string, so I'm keeping that tension tight, cutting off the tail. And I've got my original tail from when I started, and I'm going to use that to tie this off, making sure to make a really tight double knot, or maybe even more than a double knot. Here is one of my longer rows of peppers out in my in-ground garden, and you can see that there are T-posts here. So these T-posts were actually here from last year. We used T-posts and cattle panels to trellis tomatoes, and I like to rotate my crops. So last year, this was a tomato row. This year I have peppers here, so we left the T-posts here because I knew that I would need them for supporting these peppers, and let me show you what that looks like. This is a case where I literally went from this first stake all the way down to the end of this 50-foot row, and then came all the way back up, just like I showed you in my raised bed kitchen garden, but this is a much longer row with a different type of stake. This row has some sweet peppers up here near the top, and then farther down I have hotter peppers like jalapenos and poblanos. I wanted to show you the reason why I said earlier that I would maybe not recommend starting with this twine. Part of that reason is because it's so huge and unwieldy. I would much rather have a smaller roll of twine because imagine me weaving this in and out for this entire 50-foot row. It was very cumbersome, and it would be so much easier if I just had, you know, a smaller roll that would fit right in my hand and I could more easily, because honestly this works better with 2 people, but I rarely have help for this job. And so if I'm doing it by myself, I'm having to, with one hand, hold the line tight, and with only one other hand, manipulate the twine in and out between the pepper stalks and around the posts. And it would just be so much easier, especially to go around the stakes. It would be easier to have a smaller roll of twine that would fit right in your hand. So that's my advice to you, again, if you're starting from scratch, is to maybe find nylon string that comes in a smaller roll that's more easily manageable with one hand. And that is how you can support your peppers as they grow.